She was abandoned by her rich husband at the altar, but the gardener proposed to her. Samantha Harrison never imagined that the most important day of her life would turn into the worst nightmare she could ever live. There she was, wearing the most beautiful wedding dress money could buy, surrounded by 100 guests at the family's lavish estate in Aspen, when her entire life fell apart in a matter of seconds. It was exactly at the moment when the priest asked if anyone had any objections to the marriage that Julian Sterling, her millionaire fiancé, simply turned his back and walked toward the garden exit, leaving behind a deathly silence that cut through the air like a blade. Samantha remained paralyzed in her wheelchair, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes upon her, while murmurs of shock and embarrassment began to spread among the guests. The sound of Julian's footsteps retreating along the garden's stone path echoed like war drums in Samantha's heart. She gripped her hands in her lap, trying to control the tremor that took over her entire body. The white flowers decorating the altar seemed to mock her at that moment, as if all the beauty around her was just a cruel illusion. It was then that she felt a presence approach. She lifted her teary eyes and saw Caleb Miller, the estate's gardener, walking slowly toward her. He wore his green work shirt, completely out of place among the elegant guests, but his brown eyes conveyed a genuine compassion she had never seen before. Caleb knelt before Samantha's wheelchair, completely ignoring the indignant whispers that began to intensify around them. In his calloused hands, he held a single red rose, one of the flowers he himself had cultivated in the estate's garden. "Mrs. Samantha," he said in a soft voice, but firm enough for everyone to hear, "you didn't deserve this. No woman deserves to be humiliated like this." Samantha stared at him with a mix of surprise and confusion. Caleb had always been respectful and discreet during the 2 years he worked on the property, limiting himself to greeting her politely when their paths crossed in the gardens. It had never occurred to her that he might have deeper feelings. "Caleb, what are you doing?" she murmured, her voice almost inaudible due to shock. "I'm doing what that man should have done a long time ago," he replied, extending the red rose toward her. "I'm treating you with the respect and love you deserve." The guests began to stir visibly. Some of Samantha's high society friends exchanged scandalized glances, while the businessmen whispered among themselves with expressions of disapproval. The contrast between Caleb's simplicity and the elegance of the setting could not have been more striking. Martha Harrison, Samantha's mother, quickly approached with her face red with indignation. At 62, she was a woman who had always prized appearances and social conventions above all else. "What is this audacity?" she exclaimed, her sharp voice echoing through the garden. "How dare you approach my daughter at a time like this?" "Mrs. Martha," Caleb replied, slowly rising but keeping the rose extended towards Samantha. "With all due respect, someone needs to be by your daughter's side right now, and clearly it's not going to be the man who just abandoned her." The tension in the air was palpable. The guests formed a semicircle around the scene, some discreetly filming with their cell phones, others simply watching with a mix of morbid curiosity and embarrassment. Samantha felt as if she were being judged by an invisible court. Richard Harrison, father of Samantha and owner of one of the largest development groups in the Midwest, stepped forward with clenched fists. His 70 years did nothing to diminish his intimidating presence. "You're fired," he said, in a deep, threatening voice. "Get off my property immediately or I'll call security." "Dad, no," whispered Samantha, finding her voice for the first time since Julian had left. Something in Caleb's gesture had touched a deep part of her wounded soul. "Samantha, you can't be serious," intervened Martha, kneeling beside her daughter's wheelchair. "This man is an employee. He has no education, no social standing. What will society say?" "Society is already talking, Mom," Samantha replied, her voice gradually gaining strength. "They're talking about how I was jilted at the altar by the man I swore to love. At least this man had the courage to stay." Caleb still held the rose, patiently waiting for her to accept it. His eyes never left Samantha's face, as if the rest of the world had disappeared around them. "Mrs. Samantha," he said softly, "I know I have no right to say this, but I need you to know. I've worked here for 2 years, and every day I see you, my heart fills with admiration. Not for your outer beauty, which is undeniable, but for the strength I see in your eyes, for the kindness with which you treat all of us who work here." Caleb's words caused absolute silence. Even the murmurs of the guests ceased, as if everyone was hypnotized by the raw sincerity of his words. "You don't know me," Samantha replied, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over again. "I know you more than you think," said Caleb with a sad smile. "I know the woman who always stops to ask about my family when she sees me working, the woman who insisted I get promoted when she found out I have difficulties reading, the woman who secretly sent care packages to my mother when she was sick last year." Samantha was stunned. She had asked for complete discretion when she helped Caleb's family, never imagining he would find out. "How did you—" she began. "My mother told me," explained Caleb. "She said an angel had appeared in her life at the most difficult moment, and I knew immediately that it could only have been you." Martha stood up abruptly, clearly disturbed by the revelation that her daughter had secretly helped a family of employees. "Samantha, we can't stay here listening to this," she said in a tense voice. "The guests are waiting for an explanation. We need to do something about this situation." "What situation, Mom?" asked Samantha, her voice laden with a bitterness that surprised everyone. "The situation of being abandoned by the man who said he loved me, or the situation of finally having someone who shows they truly care about me." The impact of Samantha's words was immediate. Several guests began to discreetly move away, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. Others, however, seemed fascinated by the breaking of social protocol happening before their eyes. Dr. Thomas Miller, Caleb's older brother, and a respected doctor in the region, who had come as a guest due to his friendship with the Harrison family, approached the group. "Excuse me," he said diplomatically. "Perhaps it's better to continue this conversation in a more private setting. The guests are starting to disperse, and it would be appropriate to offer an official explanation for the cancellation of the ceremony." Richard looked at Dr. Thomas with an expression of relief. Finally, someone with practical sense was trying to resolve the situation in a civilized manner. "You're right, Doctor," Richard agreed. "Martha, take Samantha inside. I will speak with the guests and explain that there was a last-minute problem." "I'm not going anywhere until this man finishes speaking," declared Samantha with a firmness that surprised everyone, especially herself. Caleb looked at Dr. Thomas, who made an almost imperceptible gesture of encouragement. The two brothers had always had a special connection, and Thomas had always known about the feelings Caleb harbored for Samantha. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, "Mrs. Samantha," Caleb continued, ignoring the hostile looks around him. "I know I am just a gardener. I have no money, no social standing, nothing material to offer. But I have something that man clearly did not, true love." "How dare you speak of love?" interrupted Martha indignantly. "You barely know my daughter." "On the contrary, Mrs. Martha," Caleb replied respectfully. "I know Samantha better than anyone here imagines. I know the woman who cries hidden in the garden when she thinks no one is watching, not out of self-pity, but out of frustration at not being able to help more people. I know the woman who reads to the children at the hospital every Sunday, even when she is feeling unwell." Each word from Caleb was like a revelation to those present. Not even Martha and Richard knew about all the charitable activities Samantha carried out discreetly. "I know the woman," Caleb continued, "who cried for a whole week when she accidentally ran over a little bird with her wheelchair. The woman who has such a big heart that she sometimes hurts herself to avoid hurting others." Samantha was visibly shaken. The precision with which Caleb described her most intimate feelings was both comforting and frightening. "How do you know all this?" she asked in a whisper. "Because I have been watching you for 2 years," Caleb admitted without shame. "Not as a stalker, but as someone who has loved you from afar. Every expression of yours, every gesture, every small act of kindness, it has all been etched into my heart." Dr. Thomas cleared his throat discreetly, realizing the situation was becoming too intense for a public setting. "Caleb," he said softly, "perhaps it would be better to express your feelings at a more appropriate time." "No, Doctor," Caleb replied firmly. I have already waited 2 years in silence. Today that man showed he does not deserve her love. If I do not speak now, when will I?" Samantha took the rose from Caleb's hands, causing a collective gasp among the remaining guests. The flower trembled between her fingers as she struggled to process everything that was happening. "Are you offering me this rose because you feel sorry for me?" she asked, her voice laden with vulnerability. "No," Caleb answered immediately. "I am offering it because you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met, because your physical disability does not define who you are, because your heart is more beautiful than any rose I could ever grow." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of shoes approaching quickly. It was Chloe Harrison, Samantha's younger sister, who had run after Julian to try to convince him to come back. "Samantha!" she called out of breath. "I tried to talk to Julian, but—" She stopped abruptly upon seeing the scene before her, her sister holding a red rose, with the gardener kneeling beside her, surrounded by shocked guests and outraged parents. "What is going on here?" Chloe asked, confused. "I'm asking your sister to be my girlfriend," Caleb said simply, provoking a new wave of scandalized murmurs. "Are you crazy?" Chloe exclaimed. "She was just abandoned at the altar. This is not the time for that." "On the contrary," Caleb replied, rising slowly. "This is exactly the right time. It's time to show her that there's someone who would never abandon her." Samantha watched the argument around her as if she were a spectator in her own life. Part of her was shocked by Caleb's audacity, but another part felt deeply moved by his courage. "Did Julian say anything?" she asked Chloe, trying to shift the focus of the conversation. Chloe hesitated, exchanging uncomfortable glances with her parents. He said he couldn't do it," she murmured. "That he wasn't ready." "Ready for what?" Samantha insisted. The awkward silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Caleb, sensing there was more to the story, took a step forward. "With all due respect," he said, addressing Chloe, "but I think Samantha deserves to know the whole truth about why that man left her." "It's none of your business," Chloe replied defensively. "Yes, it is my business," Caleb replied with surprising firmness, "because I love this woman, and I won't allow her to be shielded from a truth she has a right to know." Martha approached Chloe and whispered something in her ear. Chloe's expression changed instantly, becoming even more distressed. "Mum, you can't be serious," Chloe whispered back. "What are you two talking about?" Samantha demanded, her voice taking on a commanding tone she rarely used. "I demand to know." Richard approached his daughter's wheelchair, his expression grave and weary. "Samantha," he said softly, "Julian got a call this morning. It was from your doctor." Samantha's heart stopped for a moment. She had gone to the doctor the previous week for some routine tests, but the results hadn't come in yet. "What kind of call?" she asked, though something deep inside her already suspected the answer. "The tests." Richard hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "The tests showed that you're pregnant, sweetheart." Samantha's world came to a complete halt. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind like a distant bell. She had planned to tell Julian during the honeymoon, as a romantic surprise. She never imagined he would find out this way. "And he ran because of that?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "He said—" Richard paused, visibly reluctant to continue. "He said what, Dad?" "He said he wasn't ready to raise a child with a woman. With a woman like you," Richard finished, the words coming out with difficulty. The impact of the revelation hit Samantha like a punch to the gut. Not only had Julian abandoned her, but he had abandoned her because of her disability and the child she was carrying. Caleb, who had listened to everything in silence, felt a rage building in his chest. Not a violent rage, but a deep indignation at the injustice Samantha was suffering. "What kind of man does that?" he said, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "What kind of man abandons the woman he loves precisely when she needs him most?" "The kind of man who never really loved her," Samantha replied, her voice gaining unexpected strength. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally began to stream down her cheeks, but they were tears of relief mixed with pain. "Mrs. Samantha," Caleb said, kneeling before her again, "I don't know if I have the right to say this, but I'll say it anyway. If that child were mine, I would be the proudest man in the world, and if you allow me, I will love him or her as if they were my own." The impact of Caleb's words was immediate and profound. Several of the guests still in the garden were visibly moved. Some of the older women began to cry discreetly, touched by the sincerity of his words. Mrs. Martha, however, exploded with indignation. "This has gone too far," she shouted. "How dare you make such a proposal to my daughter at a time like this? Do you think you can take advantage of her vulnerability?" "I'm not taking advantage of anything," replied Caleb calmly. "I'm offering unconditional love to a woman who deserves that and so much more." "Unconditional love?" repeated Mrs. Martha with sarcasm. "You don't even have a decent job. How do you plan to support a family?" "Mom," interrupted Samantha, her voice cutting, "stop this immediately." "Samantha, you can't be seriously considering—" "I am considering that someone finally sees me as a whole woman," said Samantha, wiping the tears from her face. "Someone who doesn't see my wheelchair as a barrier to love or be loved." Dr. Thomas approached the group, clearly concerned about the level of stress Samantha was facing. "Forgive the interruption," he said professionally, "but as a doctor, I need to warn you that all this stress isn't good for the pregnancy. Perhaps it would be better to continue this conversation another time." "Doctor," said Samantha, looking directly at him, "you know your brother better than anyone. Tell me honestly, is he the type of man who would make such a proposal on impulse or out of pity?" Dr. Thomas looked at Caleb, then back at Samantha. His answer would be crucial for the direction the situation would take. "Mrs. Samantha," he replied carefully, "Caleb is my younger brother, but he's always been the more sensible and courageous of the two of us. He's never done anything on impulse in his entire life, and if there's one thing I can guarantee about him, it's that he doesn't know the word pity. He only knows true love and loyalty." "Thomas," exclaimed Mrs. Martha indignantly, "how can you support this madness?" "I'm not supporting any madness," replied Dr. Thomas calmly. "I'm defending the right of two adults to choose their own destiny." Samantha held tightly to the rose Caleb had given her, as if it were an anchor amidst the emotional storm she was experiencing. She looked around, seeing the faces of the guests who still remained, some curious, others disapproving, a few with expressions of understanding. "Caleb," she said finally, her voice firmer than it had been all day, "are you sure about what you're saying? Are you sure you're not speaking out of emotional impulse?" "I'm absolutely sure," he replied without hesitation. "Mrs. Samantha, I've been planning this moment for months. Not exactly like this, of course, but I've been gathering the courage to talk about my feelings for a long time. And do you have concrete plans?" asked Mr. Richard, his voice still skeptical, but with a slightly less hostile tone. "Because pretty words are easy to say, but raising a family requires practical responsibility." Caleb stood up and addressed Mr. Richard directly, showing respect but also determination. "Mr. Richard," he said, "I know I don't have much materially. I live in a simple house that was my father's. I have a motorcycle I inherited from him when he passed, and my salary as a gardener isn't much, but I have plans." Mr. Richard crossed his arms, clearly interested in hearing what those plans were. "What kind of plans, Mrs. Ans? Eleanor, who owns the nursery where I buy the plants for the estate's garden, offered me a partnership in her business," explained Caleb. "She said I have a natural talent with plants and that she could teach me the administrative side. In 5 years, we could have a network of nurseries in the region." This revelation surprised everyone, especially Samantha, who didn't know about the business talent Caleb apparently possessed. "Why did you never tell me about this opportunity?" asked Mr. Richard, genuinely curious. "Because I never felt worthy enough to accept it," Caleb admitted honestly. "I always thought I was just a gardener with no formal education. But watching Mrs. Samantha all these years, seeing her strength, I learned that we can be so much more than we think we are." Samantha felt her heart race. Caleb's sincerity was unlike anything she had ever experienced. "And what about education?" asked Martha, still trying to find flaws in Caleb's plan. "You barely finished high school." "That's true," Caleb agreed without defending himself. "But Dr. Thomas has been helping me with private lessons for 2 years, and Mrs. Samantha, without knowing it, also taught me a lot." "What do you mean I taught you?" asked Samantha, surprised. Remember when you got mad at me because I pulled out some plants you thought were dead? Samantha smiled faintly for the first time that day, remembering the incident. Yes, I remember. You were very upset. You told me the plants weren't dead, just sleeping until the next season, Caleb continued. And you explained how to tell when a plant is truly lost versus when it just needs special care. That conversation completely changed the way I see gardening. It was just gardening, Caleb, Samantha said modestly. No, Mrs. Samantha, it was much more than that, Caleb replied. Ayu taught me that sometimes the most beautiful things in life only bloom when they receive love and care, even when everyone thinks they're beyond hope. The symbolism of Caleb's words was not lost on anyone. Even Martha seemed slightly moved, though she still wore a disapproving expression. Chloe, who had remained silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke up. Samantha, she said softly, I know this is all very confusing and painful, but maybe you should consider what this man is offering. Chloe, exclaimed Martha, scandalized. Mom, just listen for a minute, Chloe insisted. Julian showed us today who he really is. He abandoned Samantha at the worst possible moment. This man is offering to stand by her for better or worse. But what about the social difference, and what will people say? Argued Martha. People are already talking, Mum, Chloe replied pragmatically. They're talking about how our family was humiliated today. At least if Samantha chooses Caleb, they'll be talking about a true love story. Dr. Thomas observed the family dynamics with professional interest. As a doctor, he had seen many families go through crises, and he knew this was a decisive moment for everyone involved. If I may, he intervened diplomatically, perhaps it's not necessary to make final decisions today. Everyone is emotionally shaken. Maybe it would be wise to give some time for emotions to settle. No, Samantha said firmly, surprising everyone. I've already made my decision. The garden fell completely silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing, waiting to hear what Samantha would say next. Caleb, she said, looking directly into his eyes, you said you love me. You said you would love my child as your own. You said you have plans for the future. But I need to know one thing. Are you sure you can handle all the challenges that come with me? Caleb didn't hesitate for a second. Mrs. Samantha, I won't lie and say it will be easy. I know there will be challenges, prejudices, financial difficulties, but I also know that by your side I can face anything. And are you willing to give up your freedom for a pregnant woman you barely know? I won't be giving up my freedom, Caleb answered with conviction. I'll be gaining a purpose in life. And I know you much better than you think. Samantha closed her eyes for a moment, processing everything that had happened on the most important day of her life. When she opened them again, there was a determination in her gaze that hadn't been there before. So yes, she said clearly, I agree to date you. The reaction was instant and explosive. Martha screamed in shock. Richard swore under his breath. Chloe started crying, and the few guests who still remained in the garden began to chatter excitedly among themselves. Caleb, however, simply smiled and gently took Samantha's free hand. Thank you for giving me this chance, he said softly. Don't thank me yet, Samantha replied with a half-smile. You have no idea what you're getting into. I do know, Caleb replied. I'm getting into the biggest adventure of my life. Dr. Thomas approached the two of them, discreetly smiling. Caleb, he said, I think it would be appropriate for you to take Samantha to rest. It's been a very intense day for her, especially considering her condition. I don't need to rest, Samantha protested, but her voice betrayed the emotional exhaustion she was feeling. Of course you do, Caleb said gently, and I'll make sure you get all the rest you need. Martha approached the group, her expression still disapproving but with a slightly less hostile tone. If you're going to do this, she said hesitantly, then do it right. No scandals, no rushing. And you, she pointed at Caleb, are going to have to prove you're not just taking advantage of the situation. I will prove it, Caleb promised solemnly, every day for the rest of my life if necessary. Richard sighed deeply, clearly resigned to the situation. Well, he said wearily, at least today I learned who the family's true friends are, and who are just self-interested acquaintances. "What do you mean, Dad?" Samantha asked. "Most of the guests left as soon as Julian was gone," Richard explained. "But a few stayed to make sure you were okay. That tells me a lot about people's character." Mrs. Gladys, the estate housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 20 years, discreetly approached the group. "Sorry to interrupt," she said respectfully, "but I'd like to say that in all the years I've worked here, I've never seen anyone treat Miss Samantha with as much affection as Caleb does. He always asks about her when she's not feeling well, always offers to help when she needs anything in the nursery." This revelation surprised Samantha again, who hadn't known about Caleb's constant concern for her well-being. "Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Gladys," Samantha said emotionally. "It's the truth, my dear," the housekeeper replied, "and if you'll allow me to give some advice, when someone shows they care about you through actions and not just words, you should treasure it." Martha looked at the housekeeper with a thoughtful expression. Mrs. Gladys was a trusted woman of the family, and her opinion had always been respected in the household. "Gladys," Martha said hesitantly, "do you really think that—" "Mrs. Martha," the housekeeper gently interrupted, "I raised 3 children on my own after my husband abandoned me. I know how to recognize a man of character when I see one, and Caleb is a man of character." The housekeeper's validation seemed to have a significant impact on Martha, who finally began to reconsider her position. Dr. Thomas took advantage of the moment of relative calm to make a practical suggestion. "If you'll allow me," he said, "I think it would be appropriate to schedule a medical appointment to monitor Samantha's pregnancy, and perhaps it would also be good to talk about the practical next steps of this new situation." "You're right," Richard agreed. "First things first, Samantha's health and the baby's. We'll figure out the rest later." Caleb nodded vigorously. "I want to be present at every appointment," he said, "if Samantha allows it, of course." "I would allow it," Samantha replied. "But are you sure you want to take on so much responsibility so quickly?" "Samantha," said Caleb, kneeling once again in front of her wheelchair, "I spent 2 years dreaming of the possibility of being part of your life. Now that I have this chance, I'm not going to waste a single minute." The sincerity of his words finally broke Samantha's last resistance. For the first time since Julian had abandoned her, she allowed herself to genuinely smile. "Then let's see where this adventure of ours takes us," she said, squeezing Caleb's hand. The guests who still remained in the garden began to slowly disperse, some clearly disapproving of the situation, others visibly moved by the unexpected love story they had just witnessed. Mrs. Eleanor, the owner of the nursery that Caleb had mentioned, approached the group. She was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair and calloused hands from years of working with plants. "Caleb," she said with a warm smile, "I heard what happened here today, and I want you to know that my offer of partnership still stands. In fact, after seeing your courage today, I'm even more certain that you're the right person for the business." Caleb was visibly emotional at the unexpected support. "Mrs. Eleanor, thank you," he stammered. "And Mrs. Samantha," Eleanor continued, addressing her directly, "if you don't mind my saying, you've chosen an exceptional man. Caleb has a natural talent with plants that is rare to see. He makes flowers bloom as if by magic." "It's not magic," Caleb said modestly. "It's just love for what I do." "Exactly that," Eleanor agreed. "And a man who loves his work with such intensity will certainly love the woman he has chosen with the same intensity." Martha, who had been watching the entire interaction, finally approached Caleb. "Young man," she said with a hesitant voice, "I won't lie and say I approve of this situation, but I also can't deny that you showed more courage and loyalty today than many men I know have shown in their entire lives." Caleb looked at Martha with respect and gratitude. "Mrs. Martha, I understand your concerns. If I were Samantha's mother, I'd probably think the same way. But I hope to have the opportunity to prove that my intentions are genuine." "You will have that opportunity," Martha said with a sigh. "But know that I will be watching your every step." "I wouldn't expect any less from the mother of a woman like Samantha," Caleb replied respectfully. Richard approached the two, his expression still serious but no longer hostile. "Caleb," he said, "I'm going to be straightforward with you. I built a business empire by protecting my family from people who might take advantage of them. It's my instinct to distrust anyone who gets close to Samantha." "I understand, sir," Caleb replied. "But," Richard continued, "what you did today showed a kind of character that is rare to see. You risked your job, your reputation. You faced our entire family for her. That tells me something about who you really are." Caleb waited respectfully for Richard to finish. "That's why," Richard finally said, "I'm going to give you a chance. But just one. If you hurt my daughter or take advantage of her in any way, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." "I won't hurt her," Caleb promised solemnly. "Not today, not ever." "We'll see," said Richard. "We'll see." Dr. Thomas, who had been watching the entire family interaction, approached Samantha. "How are you feeling?" he asked professionally. "All this stress isn't good for you or the baby." "Strangely, I feel better than I have in months," Samantha replied honestly. "It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders." "What kind of weight?" asked Dr. Thomas, curious. Samantha thought for a moment before answering. "The weight of being with someone who didn't truly love me," she said finally. "I think deep down I always knew Julian wasn't with me for the right reasons." "And now?" asked Dr. Thomas. Samantha looked at Caleb, who was talking to Mrs. Eleanor about the plans for the nursery. "Now I feel like I'm finally with someone who sees me for who I really am," she replied, "and who loves me for that, not in spite of it." Dr. Thomas smiled, satisfied with the answer. "That's what matters most," he said. "The rest, you build together." Chloe approached Samantha, her eyes still red from crying. "Sister," she said softly, "are you sure about this? You're not making a decision on an emotional impulse?" "Chloe," Samantha replied, using her sister's affectionate nickname. "You know me better than anyone. Have I ever made an important decision on impulse in my life?" Chloe thought for a moment and shook her head. "Never. You always think things over 1,000 times before deciding anything." "Then trust me now," Samantha said. "I know what I'm doing." "And are you sure you're not being influenced by the hurt from Julian?" Chloe insisted. Samantha looked directly into her sister's eyes. "Chloe, for the first time in my life, I feel truly loved. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, not out of interest. For pure and simple love. If that means being influenced by hurt, then so be it." Chloe hugged her sister, finally convinced. "Then I support you," she said. "Completely." The garden began to empty slowly. The household staff started gathering the decorations from the wedding that hadn't happened, a melancholy but necessary task. Caleb helped Samantha adjust herself better in the wheelchair. "Would you like to go inside the house?" he asked gently, "or would you rather stay a little longer in the garden?" "Let's stay a little longer," Samantha replied. "This garden has always been my favorite place on the estate, and now it holds an even more special meaning." "Why?" asked Caleb, though he already suspected the answer. "Because this is where my real love story began," she said simply. Caleb smiled, feeling his heart fill with a happiness he had never experienced before. "Samantha," he said softly, "I promise I will do everything in my power to be worthy of the love you're giving me." "You're already worthy," she replied, "just for having the courage to stay when everyone else was leaving." They sat in silence for a few minutes, absorbing everything that had happened. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected on the white flowers still decorating the garden. "Caleb," Samantha said finally, "tell me about your family. I want to know everything about the man I've just accepted into my life." Caleb hesitated for a moment, clearly not used to talking about himself. "There's not much to tell," he said modestly. "We're a simple family. My father was a gardener too. My mother works as a seamstress. Dr. Thomas has always been the pride of the family for becoming a doctor." "And you?" asked Samantha. "Don't you take pride in what you've accomplished?" "I never thought I had accomplished anything worth being proud of," Caleb admitted honestly. "Caleb," Samantha said firmly, "you turned this garden into the most beautiful place I've ever seen in my life. You cared for every plant, every flower, with love and dedication. That is an extraordinary accomplishment." Caleb looked around the garden as if seeing it for the first time. I never thought of it that way, he said. Well, you should have, Samantha replied, and I hope to help you see your own qualities the way I see them. Dr. Thomas approached the two, checking his watch. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but I think it would be wise to schedule that medical appointment as soon as possible. I can call my obstetrician colleague tomorrow. That would be great, Samantha agreed. Thank you for all your help today, Doctor. It's the least I can do, Dr. Thomas replied. Caleb is my brother, and now you're part of my family too. The idea of belonging to a new family built on love rather than just blood ties moved Samantha deeply. Doctor, she said hesitantly, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you really think Caleb and I have a chance of making this work, or are you just being kind? Dr. Thomas considered the question carefully before answering. Samantha, he said finally, in my profession, I see many couples, many families. I've learned to recognize when two people have a genuine connection. And you do. It won't be easy, there will be challenges, but you have something many couples never achieve, mutual respect and true love. And is that enough? Samantha asked. It's the most important thing, Dr. Thomas replied. Everything else builds on that. Martha approached the group, carrying a small bouquet of flowers from the garden. Samantha, she said hesitantly, I know today wasn't the day you dreamed of, but maybe it was the day you needed. Samantha looked at her mother with surprise and gratitude. What do you mean by that, Mom? I mean maybe Julian did you a favor, Martha explained. He showed who he really was before it was too late, and you found someone who's truly worth it. Caleb was visibly moved by Martha's words. Mrs. Martha, he said, his voice choked. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me. Don't thank me yet, Martha said with a half smile. You still have a lot to prove. And I will prove it, Caleb promised, one day at a time. Richard joined the group, his expression more relaxed than it had been all day. Well, he said pragmatically, now we need to think about the practical aspects of the situation. Caleb, you'll need a better place to live if you're starting a family. I know, sir, Caleb replied. I've been thinking about that. Maybe I can get a loan to buy a small house. Or, Richard interjected, you can accept my offer. What offer? Caleb asked, confused. There's a small cottage on the estate near the lake, Richard explained. It's where the caretaker used to live before he retired. It's been empty for 2 years. You can live there in exchange for taking care of the entire property, not just the gardens. The offer surprised everyone, especially Caleb, who hadn't expected such generosity. Mr. Richard, I don't know what to say, Caleb stammered. Say you accept, Richard suggested pragmatically. It's good for everyone. You have a place to live. I have someone trustworthy looking after the property, and Samantha has you close by. Samantha looked at her father with a mix of gratitude and surprise. Dad, are you sure about this? She asked. I'm sure I'd rather have you happy and safe than worried about social conventions, Richard replied honestly. Dr. Thomas smiled, satisfied with how things were turning out. Seems like everything is falling into place, he commented. Not everything, Caleb said thoughtfully. There's still the issue of the social gap, the people who will talk, the prejudices we'll face. Caleb, Samantha said firmly, since the accident that put me in this wheelchair, I've learned one important thing. People are always going to talk. What matters is how you handle it. And how do you handle it? Asked Caleb. I choose to listen only to the people who truly care about me, Samantha replied. The rest, I simply ignore. Mrs. Gladys approached the group, carrying a tray with coffee and small pastries. Sorry for intruding, she said, but I thought you all might need a little sugar after so much emotion. Thank you, Mrs. Gladys, said Samantha gratefully. You always know what we need. It's what I've been doing for 20 years, the housekeeper replied with a smile. And if you'll allow me to give some advice... Of course, said Samantha. The best love stories are the ones that start with hardships, Mrs. Gladys said wisely. Because when you fight for something, you value it more when you get it. Caleb picked up a cup of coffee and offered it to Samantha before taking one for himself. Mrs. Gladys is right, he said. Nothing worthwhile in life comes easy. And you two have already shown that you're not afraid to fight, added Mrs. Gladys. That's half the battle for success. The group was silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts as they drank their coffee and absorbed the day's events. Chloe broke the silence. Samantha, she said, you're going to have to tell people about the pregnancy soon. How do you plan to handle it? Samantha unconsciously stroked her still flat stomach. I'm going to tell the truth, she said simply. That I'm pregnant, and that I found a man who loves both me and my child. And if they ask about Julian, Chloe pressed. I'll say he wasn't ready for the responsibility, Samantha replied diplomatically. I won't badmouth him publicly, but I also won't lie to protect him. Caleb nodded approvingly. That's the right approach, he said. Honesty without malice. Martha looked at Caleb with a thoughtful expression. Caleb, she said, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, Mrs. Martha. Why have you never married? A man your age, with your qualities. Surely you've had opportunities. Caleb hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the question. Well, he stammered. You can speak, encouraged Samantha. I'd like to know too. Caleb took a deep breath before answering. The truth is, I've always felt too inferior to deserve a good woman, he admitted. My difficulty reading, my limited education, my financial situation. I always thought I had nothing to offer. And what changed? Asked Martha. Caleb looked directly at Samantha. Samantha changed, he said simply. Seeing her strength, the way she faces life's challenges, I realized that worth has nothing to do with money or social status. It has to do with character and love. The answer touched everyone present deeply. Caleb, Martha said softly, you may not have a formal education, but you have a wisdom that many wealthy men I know don't possess. Thank you, Mrs. Martha, said Caleb, moved. That means a lot coming from you. Dr. Thomas checked his watch again. Everyone, he said, I think we should start wrapping up for today. It's been a very emotionally intense day for all of us, especially for Samantha. You're right, agreed Samantha. I'm starting to feel tired. Caleb immediately stood up. Would you like me to take you inside the house? He offered. I'd like that, said Samantha, but first I want to show you something. She wheeled her chair to a specific part of the garden where there was a small flower bed with particularly beautiful red roses. This is the flower bed you made especially for me when I was recovering from surgery last year, she said. Caleb was surprised she remembered. You remember that? He asked. Of course I do, Samantha replied. You said red roses represented love and hope. I would spend hours looking at them from my window. I didn't know you paid attention, Caleb said modestly. I paid attention to everything about you, Samantha admitted. More than I should have, considering I was engaged to another man. This revelation surprised Caleb. You thought about me? He asked incredulously. Constantly, Samantha confessed, and I felt guilty about it. I thought I was being disloyal to Julian. And now? Caleb asked. Now I realize my heart already knew who the right man was. Long before my mind accepted it, Samantha replied. Caleb knelt once more beside Samantha's wheelchair. Samantha, he said, his voice emotional, can I ask you something? Of course. Would you agree to marry me? The proposal took everyone by surprise, especially Samantha. Caleb, she said, her voice trembling, we just started dating. Isn't it too soon to talk about marriage? Maybe it is, Caleb admitted. But I don't want you or your son to go through unnecessary embarrassment. I want everyone to know that my intentions are serious and honorable. Richard approached the two. Son, he said, I admire your rush to do the right thing, but my daughter is right. You need to get to know each other better before making such a decision. Dad is right, Samantha agreed, but I appreciate the gesture, Caleb. It shows what kind of man you are. How about an engagement? Martha suggested unexpectedly, surprising everyone. It doesn't have to be long, but it would give you time to get used to the idea, and for society to get used to it as well. Martha's suggestion caught everyone off guard. Mom, Samantha said, surprised. Are you serious? I'm serious, Martha confirmed. If you're going to do this, do it right. An official engagement shows that the relationship is serious and respectful. Caleb looked at Samantha, waiting for her reaction. "What do you think?" he asked. Samantha thought for a few moments before answering. "I think," she said slowly, "I think it's a good idea. It would give us time to plan our future properly." "So you accept?" Caleb asked, a smile forming on his face. "I accept," Samantha replied, prompting spontaneous applause from everyone present. Dr. Thomas approached to hug his brother. "Congratulations, Caleb," he said proudly. "You finally found your happiness." "I found much more than that," Caleb replied, looking at Samantha. "I found my purpose in life." Mrs. Gladys began to cry with emotion. "In all the years I've worked at this estate," she said through tears, "this is the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed." Chloe hugged her sister tightly. "I'm so happy for you," she whispered in Samantha's ear. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Richard extended his hand to Caleb. "Welcome to the family," he said solemnly. "Officially this time." "Thank you, sir," Caleb replied, shaking his future father-in-law's hand firmly and with gratitude. The sun had set completely, and the garden lights began to turn on automatically, creating a magical atmosphere around the group. "I think this is the perfect ending to a day that started so difficult," commented Dr. Thomas. "It's not the ending," Samantha corrected with a smile. "It's only the beginning." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the weeks following the day of the cancelled wedding, Samantha and Caleb's lives took a completely different turn from anything they had imagined. The news of the engagement between the Almeida heiress and the family gardener spread like wildfire throughout Aspen, sparking reactions ranging from romantic admiration to moral outrage. Caleb moved into the caretaker's house on the Harrison estate, just as Mr. Richard had offered. It was a simple but comfortable house, with 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen, and a garden that Caleb quickly turned into a little paradise of flowers and medicinal plants. Samantha visited the house every day, and together they began planning what life would be like when they got married and when the baby was born. During these conversations, they discovered a compatibility that went far beyond the initial physical or emotional attraction. "Caleb," said Samantha one sunny afternoon, watching him plant tomato seedlings in the garden, "have you ever thought about what kind of father you want to be?" Caleb stopped what he was doing and looked at her thoughtfully. "Every day," he answered honestly. "I want to be the kind of father my father was to me and Thomas. Present, affectionate, but firm when needed." "What was your father like?" asked Samantha, realizing she knew very little about her fiancé's family. Caleb smiled fondly as he remembered his father. "My father was a simple man but wise," he said. "He worked hard every day, but always came home with energy to play with us. He never hit us, but when he spoke, we obeyed, because we respected him." "And when did he die?" 5 years ago, Caleb replied, his voice growing quieter. "Heart attack." It was very sudden. One morning, he was planting roses in a client's garden. In the afternoon, he was in the hospital. By evening, he was gone. Samantha felt her heart tighten, seeing the pain in Caleb's eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "It must have been very hard." "It was," Caleb admitted. "But it also taught me to cherish every moment. My father always said you never know how much time you have, so it's better to love fiercely while you can." "Is that why you were so brave that day?" asked Samantha. "Exactly," Caleb confirmed. "I saw you being humiliated by that man and thought, if I don't act now, I might lose forever the chance to show my love for her." Samantha wheeled closer to him. "I am so grateful for your courage," she said, taking his dirt-covered hand in hers. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stayed." "You would have survived," Caleb said with conviction. "You're stronger than you think. But I hope you never have to find that out alone again." They sat in silence for a few moments, just appreciating each other's presence and the tranquility of the garden. "Caleb," Samantha finally said, We need to talk about some practical things. What kind of things? Well, first, your work with Mrs. Eleanor at the nursery. Have you decided whether you'll accept the partnership? Caleb sighed. I want to accept, he said. But I'm afraid I'm not ready. What if I mess everything up? What if I lose the money she invests in me? Samantha looked at him seriously. Caleb, are you afraid of failing, or are you afraid of succeeding? The question caught Caleb off guard. What do you mean? Sometimes we're afraid of success because it changes our life in ways we can't control, Samantha explained. You've spent your whole life seeing yourself as just a gardener. Maybe you're afraid of discovering you can be so much more. Caleb's words hit a sensitive spot. Maybe you're right, he admitted. I always felt safe being invisible, just the gardener who tends the plants and leaves. But now you're not invisible anymore, Samantha said softly. Now you're my fiancé, you're going to be a father, you're going to own a company. You need to learn to see yourself the way I see you. And how do you see me? Asked Caleb. I see a smart, dedicated, caring, brave man with an extraordinary talent for making things grow and flourish, Samantha answered without hesitation. I see a man who has the potential to be anything he wants to be. The conviction in Samantha's voice deeply moved Caleb. Samantha, he said, his voice choked, how can you have so much faith in me when I barely have any in myself? Because true love sees potential where the person themselves only sees limitations, she replied wisely. Just like you make me feel beautiful and complete, even when I feel broken and inadequate. Caleb knelt on the ground beside Samantha's wheelchair and took both her hands. Samantha, he said intensely, I promise I'll accept the partnership with Mrs. Eleanor, and I'll give my best to make it work. And I promise to be by your side, supporting you every step of the way, Samantha replied. They kissed softly, sealing another promise in their growing relationship. The next day, Caleb went to Mrs. Eleanor's nursery to formalize the partnership. It was a modest but well-kept establishment, with an impressive variety of ornamental plants, fruit tree saplings, and flowers of all kinds. Mrs. Eleanor greeted him with a warm smile. Caleb, she exclaimed. Finally, I've been expecting you to show up here since the day of, well, the non-wedding. Sorry for the delay, Mrs. Eleanor, Caleb said respectfully. I had some personal things to sort out first. And did you? She asked with a mischievous gleam in her eyes. I did, Caleb confirmed with a smile, and now I'm ready to accept your offer of partnership. Great, said Mrs. Eleanor, clapping her hands. Let's go to my office to discuss the details. Mrs. Eleanor's office was small but organized, with shelves full of gardening manuals and photographs of gardens she had helped create over the years. So, Caleb, she said, sitting behind a simple wooden desk, I'll be straightforward with you. This business is doing well, but I'm getting old. I need someone young, with energy and talent, to help me expand. What kind of expansion do you have in mind? Caleb asked. Well, first I want to open another nursery in the neighboring town, Mrs. Eleanor explained. Then, I'm thinking of creating a full landscaping service, and in the future, who knows, even exporting plants to other regions. Caleb's eyes lit up at the possibilities. That sounds amazing, he said, but I don't know anything about business management. I'll teach you, Mrs. Eleanor said simply, and you can take night courses. The important thing is that you have the natural talent that can't be taught. The rest we learn. They spent 2 hours discussing the details of the partnership. Mrs. Eleanor would initially be the majority partner, but as Caleb learned and contributed, his share would increase. One last thing, Caleb, Mrs. Eleanor said at the end of the meeting. I heard you're going to be a father. Yes, Ma'am, Caleb confirmed, without going into details about the complex situation. Good, she said approvingly. A man who takes on responsibilities is exactly the kind of partner I'm looking for. When Caleb returned home, he found Samantha waiting for him in the garden, an anxious expression on her face. How did it go? She asked immediately. Better than I expected, Caleb replied with a wide smile. Mrs. Eleanor has big plans for the business, and she wants to teach me everything about management. I knew it, Samantha exclaimed joyfully. I knew it would work out. There's more, Caleb said, his excitement growing. "She said that once I learn enough, we can open a branch specialized in medicinal plants. Apparently there's a big market for that in the region." Samantha clapped her hands with joy. "Caleb, that's wonderful," she said. "You're fulfilling dreams you didn't even know you had." "It's true," Caleb agreed. "And it all started because you made me believe I could be more than I thought I was." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans for the future. Caleb described in detail everything he had talked about with Mrs. Eleanor, and Samantha contributed ideas and suggestions based on her experience managing the family's business. "You know what impresses me the most?" Samantha said at one point. "What?" "You have a natural instinct for business," she explained. "The questions you asked Mrs. Eleanor, the concerns you raised, it shows you think like an entrepreneur, even without realizing it." "You think so?" Caleb asked, genuinely surprised. "I'm sure of it," Samantha confirmed. "And you know what that means?" "What?" "It means our child is going to have a father who not only loves him, but can also give him a secure and prosperous future." Mention of the baby always moved Caleb deeply. "Samantha," he said softly, "can I touch your belly?" Samantha smiled and guided his hand to her still unnoticeable abdomen. "Our child," Caleb murmured with reverence. "Our child," Samantha repeated, covering his hand with hers. They stayed like that for several minutes, connected not only to each other, but to the new life growing inside, which represented the future they were building together. A few weeks later, the day of the first prenatal appointment arrived. Dr. Thomas had scheduled it with Dr. Susan Foster, one of the best obstetricians in the region. Caleb was visibly nervous when they arrived at the office. "Are you okay?" Samantha asked, noticing his anxiety. "It's the first time I'm going to an appointment as a father," he said hesitantly. "A foster father," Samantha corrected gently. "No," Caleb said firmly. "As a father. This baby is going to be my son in every way that matters." The determination in Caleb's voice moved Samantha deeply. Dr. Susan was a woman in her early 40s, with a warm but professional presence. "So you must be the famous Caleb," she said with a friendly smile as they entered the office. "Dr. Thomas told me your story. Very romantic." "Thank you, Doctor," Caleb replied shyly. "And Samantha," Dr. Susan continued, "how have you been feeling?" "Good, considering the circumstances," Samantha answered. "Some morning sickness, but nothing unbearable." "That's normal," Dr. Susan reassured. "Let's run some tests to see how everything is." During the exam, when the sound of the baby's heartbeat echoed through the room via the ultrasound machine, Caleb began to cry silently. "First time hearing it?" Dr. Susan asked gently. Caleb just nodded, unable to speak. "It's always moving," the doctor said understandingly, "and this baby has a strong, healthy heart." "Is he okay?" Samantha asked anxiously. "Perfectly fine," Dr. Susan confirmed. "Right size for gestational age, all parameters normal. Congratulations to both of you." When they left the office, Caleb was still visibly emotional. "Did you hear that?" he said to Samantha. "Our son has a strong heart." "I did hear it," Samantha replied with tears in her eyes. "And I saw how you reacted. Caleb, you're already a wonderful father, and the baby hasn't even been born yet." "I've never felt so complete," Caleb said, struggling to find the right words. "It's like my whole life has led up to this moment." They decided to go to the city park to celebrate the good news. Samantha had always liked the park, especially the part near the lake, where she could feed the ducks and watch other families enjoying happy moments. "Caleb," said Samantha, while they watched a young couple playing with their little son, "have you ever thought about how we'll tell our son our story when he grows up?" Caleb considered the question carefully. "We'll tell the truth," he said finally, "that his biological father wasn't ready to be a father, but that he gained a father who chose him and loved him since before he was born." "And if he asks about Julian?" insisted Samantha. "We'll say Julian is a good person who simply wasn't ready for the responsibility of being a father," Caleb replied diplomatically. "We won't speak ill of him, but we also won't lie about what happened." Caleb's maturity regarding the delicate situation impressed Samantha. "You're right," she agreed. Honesty is always the best policy with children. And who knows, added Caleb thoughtfully, maybe one day Julian will change his mind and want to meet his son. If that happens, we won't stop him. But he will know that I am the father who raised, educated, and was present every day. The generosity of spirit Caleb showed, even towards someone who had deeply hurt the woman he loved, showed Samantha the kind of exceptional man she had chosen to spend her life with. While they were at the park, they ran into Brooke Miller, an old school friend of Samantha, who was strolling with her 2 young children. "Samantha!" exclaimed Brooke in surprise. "What a coincidence running into you here." The 2 women greeted each other warmly, and Samantha introduced Caleb. "Brooke, this is my fiancé, Caleb," she said proudly. "Fiancé?" repeated Brooke, confused. "But I thought you were going to marry Julian Sterling." "Plans changed," said Samantha simply, without going into details. Brooke discreetly looked at Caleb, clearly trying to process the situation. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said politely. "The pleasure is mine," Caleb replied courteously. After Brooke said goodbye and walked away with the children, Samantha sighed. "That's a conversation I'm going to have many times in the coming months," she commented. "Do you mind?" asked Caleb. "I mind that people will judge you without knowing you," Samantha answered honestly, "but I don't mind having to explain that I chose the right man." "And are you sure you chose the right man?" asked Caleb, a shadow of insecurity crossing his face. Samantha stopped the wheelchair and turned to look directly at him. "Caleb Miller," she said firmly, "you are the man who stayed when everyone else left. You are the man who took on a child who isn't even biologically yours. You are the man who makes me feel loved every day. If that's not the right man, then I don't know what is." Samantha's words dispelled Caleb's momentary insecurities. "Thank you for reminding me," he said, gently kissing her forehead. When they got home, they found Martha waiting for them in the living room, with a worried expression on her face. "Mom," said Samantha upon seeing her, "did something happen?" "Samantha, dear," said Martha hesitantly, "I just received a very strange phone call." "What kind of call?" asked Caleb, immediately alert. "It was from Julian," Martha replied, causing a tense silence in the room. Samantha felt her stomach tighten. "What did he want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "He said he wants to talk to you," Martha explained. "He said he made a mistake and wants a chance to explain himself." Caleb tensed visibly but said nothing, waiting to see how Samantha would react. "And what did you tell him?" asked Samantha. "I said I'd pass along the message, but the decision would be yours," Martha replied. Samantha was silent for a few moments, processing the information. "Samantha," Caleb said softly, "whatever your decision, I support it." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Wouldn't you be upset if I talked to him?" "I'd be worried," Caleb admitted honestly. "But I'd trust you. And I think you deserve an explanation, even if it's too late to change anything." Caleb's maturity and confidence impressed both Samantha and Martha. "Mom," Samantha finally said, "you can call him and tell him I'll agree to talk. But here at home, with you and Caleb present." "Are you sure, dear?" Martha asked. "I'm sure," Samantha confirmed. "I need to close this chapter of my life properly before I can fully move on." Caleb nodded approvingly. "I think it's the right decision," he said, "and I'll be by your side the whole time." Martha scheduled the meeting for the following afternoon. Julian arrived punctually, driving his imported car and wearing an expensive suit, a stark contrast to Caleb's simplicity. The tension in the air was palpable as he entered the living room. Samantha was sitting in her wheelchair with Caleb standing beside her, and Martha seated in a nearby armchair. "Samantha," Julian said, his voice heavy with emotion, "thank you for agreeing to see me." "Don't thank me," Samantha replied coldly. "Just say what you came to say." Julian looked nervously at Caleb, clearly uncomfortable with his presence. I'd like to talk in private," he said. "No," Samantha said firmly. "Caleb is my fiancé and my mother is my family. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of them." Julian sighed, realizing he had no choice. "Fine," he agreed. "Samantha, I came here because I realized I made the biggest mistake of my life." "Go on," Samantha said, her voice revealing no emotion. When I found out about the pregnancy, I panicked, Julian explained. It wasn't because of your disability, like you might have thought. It was because I wasn't ready to be a father. And leaving a pregnant woman at the altar is the proper way to handle that? Caleb asked, unable to hold back. Julian looked at him with hostility. I wasn't talking to you, he said sharply. But I was talking to you, Caleb replied calmly. And I have every right to speak, considering I'm going to be this child's father. The child is mine, Julian exploded. Biologically, maybe, Caleb said without flinching. But in every other way that matters, she'll be mine. Samantha raised her hand, asking for silence. Stop it, both of you, she said with authority. Julian, finish what you came to say. Julian took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. Samantha, I was scared, he continued. The idea of having a child, of having all that responsibility. I couldn't handle it. So I ran away. And now? Samantha asked. What changed? Now I've had time to think, Julian said. And I realized I lost the woman I loved because of fear. I want a second chance. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Martha watched everything closely, ready to intervene if necessary. Caleb remained calm but alert. Julian, Samantha finally said, are you asking for a second chance out of love or out of guilt? The question caught Julian off guard. Out of love, of course, he replied, but without much conviction. That's a lie, Samantha said firmly. If you loved me, you would never have abandoned me when I needed you most. Samantha, please. No, she interrupted. Let me finish. You left me pregnant at the altar, in front of 100 people. You humiliated me in the worst possible way. And now you come here asking for a second chance? I know I made a mistake, said Julian desperately. But we can start over. We can be a real family. Caleb stepped forward, his patience finally running out. A real family, he repeated incredulously. Where were you when Samantha had morning sickness? Where were you when she needed to go to the doctor? Where were you when she cried from fear of raising a child alone? I can make up for all of that, Julian stammered. No, you can't, said Caleb firmly, because I was already there. I held her hand during the first doctor's appointment. I comforted her when she felt insecure. I'm already being the father this child needs. Julian looked at Samantha in despair. Samantha, you can't be seriously thinking about marrying him, he said, pointing at Caleb. He's a gardener. He can't give you everything I can give you. You're right, said Samantha calmly. He can't give me everything you can. He can't give me a luxury car, expensive jewelry, or trips around the world. Julian's face lit up, thinking Samantha was acknowledging his advantages. Exactly, he said. I can give you a life of luxury. Our child can go to the best schools. But he can give me something you never could, continued Samantha, cutting Julian off. He can give me true love, absolute loyalty, and the certainty that he will never abandon me. Julian's expression changed drastically. Samantha, you're making a mistake, he said bitterly. This man is taking advantage of your vulnerable situation. My vulnerable situation? Repeated Samantha with growing indignation. And who made me vulnerable, Julian? Who abandoned me at the worst moment of my life? I already apologized for that. An apology doesn't erase the humiliation, replied Samantha. An apology doesn't erase the days of crying, the sleepless nights, the fear of the future. But Caleb's love erased all of that. Julian looked around the room, seeking support. Mrs. Martha, he said, addressing Samantha's mother, you can't approve of this madness. Your daughter is throwing her life away. Martha stood up slowly, her posture dignified and imposing. Julian, she said coldly, you abandoned my daughter on the day that should have been the happiest of her life. This man, pointing at Caleb, treated her with more love and respect in one day than you did in 2 years of engagement. But Mrs. Martha, there are no buts, interrupted Martha. Your presence is no longer welcome in this house. Please leave. Julian stood still for a few seconds, clearly shocked by the family's complete rejection. Samantha, he said one last time. "If you change your mind—" "I won't change my mind," said Samantha, with absolute firmness. "Never." Julian looked at Caleb with poorly concealed hatred. "You may have won for now," he said bitterly, "but when she realizes you can't properly support her, she'll come back to me." Caleb stepped closer to Julian, his posture calm but intimidating. "I will support my family with love, honest work, and dedication," he said quietly. "Three things you clearly don't understand." Julian left the house, slamming the door, leaving a heavy silence behind him. Samantha let out a deep sigh, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "It's over," she said simply. "How do you feel?" asked Caleb, kneeling beside her chair. "Free," replied Samantha with a smile. "Finally, free." Martha approached the two of them. "Samantha, dear," she said proudly, "you made the right choice. And Caleb, you behaved like a true gentleman." "Thank you, Mrs. Martha," said Caleb. "I know it wasn't easy for you to accept me at first." "It really wasn't," admitted Martha honestly. "But you've proven your worth in every way that matters." In the weeks following the meeting with Julian, Samantha and Caleb's life settled into a happy, productive routine. Caleb was dedicating himself intensely to learning the nursery business with Mrs. Eleanor, while Samantha prepared for the baby's arrival and helped with the administrative matters of the new company. Their relationship deepened in ways neither had anticipated. They discovered they shared not only love, but also fundamental values about family, work, and life. "Caleb," Samantha said one morning, as they had coffee in the garden of the caretaker's house, "have you picked a name for the baby yet?" "I have a few ideas," he replied with a smile, "but I wanted to know if you have any preferences first." "Actually, I do," Samantha said. "If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Rose." "Rose?" Caleb repeated, surprised. "Because of the roses in the garden?" "Because of the red rose you gave me on the hardest day of my life," Samantha explained. "That rose represented hope when I had none left." Caleb was visibly moved by the explanation. "And if it's a boy?" he asked. "I was thinking Asher," Samantha said. "It means who is like God, and I want our son to have the strength and kindness to face anything in life." "Rose and Asher," Caleb repeated thoughtfully. "They're perfect names. So you agree?" "I completely agree," Caleb said. "But can I suggest middle names?" "Of course. If it's a girl, how about Hope Rose?" Caleb suggested. "And if it's a boy, Asher Hope?" Samantha was touched by the suggestion. "Hope is perfect," she agreed, "because that's what you brought into my life." They spent the rest of the morning talking about plans for the future, from decorating the baby's room to dreams of expanding the plant business to other parts of the country. That afternoon, they received an unexpected visit. It was Dr. Thomas, accompanied by an elegant woman Samantha didn't recognize. "Caleb, Samantha," Dr. Thomas said with a mysterious smile. "I'd like to introduce you to Audrey Chambers." Audrey was a woman in her 50s, well-dressed and with a professional air. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Audrey said with a slightly different accent. "Thomas has told me a lot about you two." "Audrey is a lawyer specializing in corporate law," Dr. Thomas explained, "and she has an interesting proposal for you." Caleb and Samantha exchanged curious looks. "What kind of proposal?" Samantha asked. "Well," Audrey said, sitting down in the chair Caleb had offered, "I represent a group of investors interested in expanding the ornamental plant and landscaping market in the region." "And what does that have to do with us?" Caleb asked, genuinely confused. "We heard about your talent with plants and the partnership you're forming with Mrs. Eleanor," Audrey explained, "and we'd like to propose an investment partnership." The proposal caught both Caleb and Samantha completely off guard. "What do you mean by an investment partnership?" Samantha asked, her experience with family business making her understand the implications. "We would invest capital to quickly expand the nursery network in exchange for a share of the profits," Audrey explained. "You'd keep operational control, but you'd have resources to grow much faster." Caleb grew visibly nervous at the magnitude of the proposal. "But I'm barely learning the basics," he said honestly. "How can I manage such a large operation?" That's why the partnership would include specialized consulting, Audrey said patiently. You'd have all the support you need to learn and grow. Dr. Thomas stepped forward. Caleb, he said, this is a unique opportunity. Sophia represents serious people with a lot of money and a genuine interest in the sector. Samantha, however, was analyzing the situation with more skepticism. Sophia, she said diplomatically, this proposal seems too good to be true. Why would a group of investors be interested in a small business like ours? Sophia smiled, clearly impressed by Samantha's shrewdness. Because you won't be small for long, she replied. The ornamental plant market is growing exponentially. People increasingly want to bring nature into their homes and offices, and you have something that can't be bought: natural talent and genuine passion for what you do. And what exactly would the terms of this partnership be? Asked Samantha, her business experience taking over. Sophia pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. Everything is here, she said. An initial investment of $2 million, a 30% share of the profits, and a commitment to reinvest for 5 years. The numbers made Caleb gasp. $2 million, he repeated in disbelief. It's a substantial investment, but proportional to the potential we see in the business, explained Sophia. Samantha picked up the documents and began examining them carefully. May I take these documents for review? She asked. Of course, agreed Sophia. But the offer has a deadline. We need an answer in 2 weeks. After Sophia and Dr. Thomas left, Caleb and Samantha sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process what had happened. Samantha, Caleb finally said, do you think this is real? It seems real, Samantha replied cautiously, but we'll need to check everything very carefully before making any decisions. $2 million, Caleb muttered, still in shock. I've never seen that much money in my life. It's a lot of money, Samantha agreed, but with great opportunities come great responsibilities. Are you ready for that? Caleb considered the question carefully. Alone, no, he admitted. But with you by my side, I think I can face any challenge. Samantha smiled and took his hand. Then let's study this proposal together, she said, and make the best decision for our future and the future of our child. They spent the next few days meticulously analyzing every aspect of the proposal. Samantha used her contacts in the business community to verify the credibility of Sophia and her investors, while Caleb talked extensively with Mrs. Eleanor about the implications of the partnership for the current business. What did Mrs. Eleanor think of the proposal? Asked Samantha during one of their nightly reviews. She was thrilled, replied Caleb. She said it's exactly the kind of opportunity she always dreamed of, but never had enough capital to take advantage of. And she doesn't mind that you won't be the sole owners of the business anymore. Actually, she prefers it that way, explained Caleb. She said she'd rather have a smaller share in a large, successful company than own a small, limited one. Samantha nodded, understanding the logic. Makes sense, she agreed. And my contacts confirmed that Sophia represents a legitimate group of investors with a solid track record. So you think we should accept? Asked Caleb. Samantha hesitated before answering. I think it's an incredible opportunity, she said, but I want to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. What do you mean? Are you accepting because you genuinely want to expand the business and build something big, or because you think you need to become rich to be worthy of me? Asked Samantha directly. The question hit a sensitive spot in Caleb. He began, then stopped. Maybe a bit of both. Caleb, said Samantha softly, you are already worthy of me. You've proven that 1,000 times. You don't need to be rich to deserve my love. But I want to give you and our child everything you deserve, said Caleb. And you can, Samantha assured him, with or without this investment. But if we're going to accept, let it be because we want to build something extraordinary together, not because you think you have something to prove. Caleb reflected on Samantha's words for several minutes. You're right, he finally said. I want to accept because I believe we can create something truly special, something that not only brings us prosperity, but also makes a difference in other people's lives. How so? Asked Samantha, intrigued. I was thinking, Caleb explained with growing enthusiasm, what if we used part of the company's success to create a program that teaches gardening to people with disabilities, or that provides free plants to hospitals and nursing homes? Samantha's eyes lit up at the idea. Caleb, that's brilliant, she exclaimed, using the business as a force for social good. Exactly, said Caleb. That way, we wouldn't just be making money, we'd be building a legacy. The conversation sealed their decision. The next day, they called Audrey and scheduled a meeting to finalize the partnership details. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit the like button and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the meeting took place in Audrey's office, a modern and elegant space downtown. Besides Audrey, 2 other representatives from the investor group were present: Gregory Vance, an experienced businessman in the agribusiness sector, and Kimberly Shaw, a franchise expansion specialist. Caleb, Samantha, said Audrey once everyone settled around the meeting table, we're very happy with your decision to accept our proposal. Thank you for the opportunity, Caleb replied respectfully, but we have a few additional conditions we'd like to include in the agreement. Gregory raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What kind of conditions? He asked. Samantha stepped forward, taking the lead in the business negotiations. We want to include a clause that allocates 5% of annual profits to social projects related to therapeutic gardening and free distribution of plants to charitable institutions. Kimberly smiled, clearly impressed. What an interesting idea, she commented. This could be excellent for brand image. It's not about image, Caleb clarified. It's about purpose. We want to build a business that makes a difference in the world. Gregory nodded approvingly. I admire that approach, he said. Actually, this adds value to the investment. Companies with social responsibility perform better in the long run. Audrey made some notes on the documents. I have no problem including that clause, she said. What other conditions do you have? We want to maintain full control over decisions related to employee welfare and the company's environmental policies, said Samantha. And we want a guarantee that you'll never use pesticides or fertilizers that could harm the environment. Those are very reasonable conditions, agreed Kimberly. In fact, they align perfectly with current market trends. The negotiations continued for 2 hours, with every detail carefully discussed and agreed upon. In the end, they had a contract that satisfied both the investors and Caleb and Samantha's dreams. There's one more thing, said Caleb as they were about to sign the documents. What is it? Asked Audrey. Mrs. Eleanor needs to be present for the signing, he said. Without her, none of this would have been possible. Of course, Audrey immediately agreed. Actually, it would be an honor to have Mrs. Eleanor with us at this historic moment. The signing ceremony was scheduled for the following week at Mrs. Eleanor's nursery, surrounded by the plants that had been the catalyst for all that transformation. During the week of preparation, Caleb couldn't hide his excitement and nervousness. Samantha, he said one afternoon, sometimes I wake up and can't believe all of this is really happening. It's real, Samantha assured him with a smile, and you deserve every second of it. We deserve it, Caleb corrected. I could never have gotten here without you. Of course you could, Samantha protested. You always had the talent and dedication. I just helped you believe in yourself. Caleb approached her wheelchair and knelt down, as had become his habit whenever he wanted to have an intimate conversation. Samantha, he said softly, there's something I need to tell you. What is it? I love you more every day, he said emotionally. And it's not just because you support me, or because we're going to have a child together. It's because you make me want to be the best version of myself. Samantha felt tears well up in her eyes. Caleb, she said, her voice choked. You already are the best version of yourself. You just needed to realize that. They kissed tenderly, a moment of intimacy and connection amidst all the exciting changes happening in their lives. The day of the contract signing dawned sunny and perfect. Mrs. Eleanor's nursery was more beautiful than ever, with all the plants in full bloom, as if nature itself was celebrating the moment. Besides the investors and close family, Mrs. Eleanor had invited some of her oldest clients to witness the historic moment. Even some employees from the Harrison estate came to support Caleb. "Caleb," said Mrs. Eleanor shortly before the ceremony, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. When I offered that first partnership, I saw potential, but you've exceeded all my expectations." "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor," Caleb replied, moved. "You believed in me when even I didn't believe in myself. And now look where we are," she said with a radiant smile. The signing ceremony was simple but emotional. Audrey gave a speech about the bright future awaiting the company, Gregory spoke about the expansion potential, and Kimberly highlighted the innovative aspect of the business's social component. When it was Caleb's turn to speak, he stood before everyone present with Samantha by his side. "6 months ago," he began, his voice slightly trembling with emotion, "I was just a gardener taking care of the plants in silence. Today, I'm here signing a contract to create something that can change many lives." He looked at Samantha with love. "This was only possible because an extraordinary woman believed in me," he continued. "She taught me that value has nothing to do with money or social status. It has to do with character, dedication, and love." Everyone present applauded, moved. "And I promise," Caleb said, addressing both the investors and his family, "that we will build not just a successful company, but a legacy of love, care, and social responsibility." When they finally signed the documents, there was an explosion of applause and congratulations. Mrs. Eleanor cried with emotion. Martha and Richard hugged Caleb as if he were truly a son, and Samantha radiated pride and happiness. During the impromptu party that followed the signing, Dr. Thomas approached Caleb. "Brother," he said with pride, "Dad would be so proud if he could see you today." "You think so?" Caleb asked, always touched when someone mentioned their father. "I'm sure of it," Dr. Thomas confirmed. "He always said that the most important thing in life wasn't how much money you had, but how many lives you touched positively. And that's exactly what I intend to do," said Caleb with determination. As the afternoon wore on and the party began to disperse, Samantha and Caleb were alone in the nursery garden, taking in everything that had happened. "How are you feeling?" asked Samantha. "Scared," Caleb admitted honestly, "but also more excited than I've ever felt in my life." "And it's normal to be scared," Samantha reassured him. "Great opportunities always bring great responsibilities." "What if I can't do it?" Caleb asked, voicing his deepest fear. Samantha turned her wheelchair to face him. "Caleb Miller," she said firmly, "you've already proven you can overcome any obstacle. You turned a simple garden into the most beautiful place on the estate. You won the heart of a woman who thought she could never love again. You took on a child who isn't even biologically yours. If that's not proof that you can do anything, I don't know what is." Samantha's words dispelled Caleb's momentary insecurities. "You're right," he said with a smile. "And besides, I'm not doing this alone. I have you, I have Mrs. Eleanor, I have a whole team of people supporting me." "Exactly," Samantha agreed. "And together, we can conquer the world." They spent the rest of the afternoon making detailed plans for the coming months. The first step would be expanding the current nursery, followed by opening 2 branches in neighboring towns. At the same time, they would begin developing the social responsibility program. "You know what I'm most excited to start?" Caleb said at one point. "What?" "The program for people with disabilities," he replied. "I want to show that everyone can contribute, regardless of their physical limitations." "That's going to be amazing," Samantha agreed. "And who knows, maybe we'll inspire other companies to do something similar." "That's the goal," Caleb said. "We don't just want to succeed, we want to create a model that others can follow." When they finally returned home that night, they found a surprise waiting for them. Richard had hired a small decorating team to prepare the baby's room in the caretaker's house. "Dad?" Samantha said in surprise, seeing the lights on in the house. "I thought you deserved a little surprise after such a special day," Richard explained with a smile. When they entered the house, they were stunned. What had once been an empty room had turned into a perfect nursery, decorated in soft shades of green and yellow, with plant and flower motifs on the walls. "Daddy," Samantha said with tears in her eyes, "this is beautiful." "And practical too," Richard added pragmatically. "Everything was chosen with accessibility for your wheelchair in mind." Caleb was visibly moved by the gesture. "Mr. Richard," he said with a choked voice, "Thank you. This means so much to us." "You're part of the family now," Richard said simply, "and this child will be my grandchild. I want you to have everything you need." Martha appeared at the bedroom door, carrying a small red rose in a vase. "To complete the decoration," she said with a smile, placing the rose on the nursery windowsill. "Mom," Samantha said emotionally, "you didn't have to do all this." "Yes, we did," Martha replied. "You taught us so much about true love. It's the least we can do to give back." That night, Samantha and Caleb stayed up late, talking about the future as they gazed at the nursery that would soon house their son. "Caleb," Samantha said softly, "do you think our son will grow up knowing how much he is loved?" "I am absolutely sure," Caleb replied without hesitation, "because he will grow up in a family that built happiness on solid foundations, love, respect, honest work, and compassion for others. And he will know that no matter what challenges life brings, there will always be people willing to fight by his side," Samantha added. "As we learned," Caleb agreed, gently kissing Samantha's still not visible belly. The next months passed like a whirlwind of activity. The company grew quickly, exceeding all investor expectations. Caleb proved to be not only a talented gardener, but also a natural leader, inspiring employees and winning over clients with his genuine passion for what he did. The social responsibility program was also an extraordinary success. They established partnerships with 5 hospitals in the region, providing plants and therapeutic gardening sessions for recovering patients. They also created a training program for people with disabilities, teaching them to grow plants as a way to generate income. "The third quarter numbers are impressive," Audrey commented during a follow-up meeting. "You are growing 50% faster than we projected. It's the result of having a team that truly believes in what they are doing," Caleb replied modestly. Gregory nodded approvingly. "And the impact of the social program has been fantastic for the brand," he added. "You are becoming a case study on how to combine commercial success with positive social impact." Samantha, who was 7 months pregnant and radiating happiness, smiled proudly. "The most important thing is that we are truly making a difference in people's lives," she said. "Financial success is a consequence of that." Kimberly consulted her reports. "Speaking of expansion," she said, "we have proposals to open branches in 3 different states. Do you feel ready for growth of this magnitude?" Caleb and Samantha exchanged glances. They had discussed this possibility extensively. "We are ready," Caleb replied confidently, "but we want to maintain our business philosophy in all branches. Quality, sustainability, and social responsibility are non-negotiable." "That's exactly why you are having so much success," Audrey said with admiration. After the meeting, Caleb and Samantha went home, where they found Dr. Thomas waiting with news. "How was the appointment with Dr. Susan?" Samantha asked immediately. Dr. Thomas smiled broadly. "Everything is perfect," he replied. "The baby is in an ideal position. All parameters are excellent. She thinks you could give birth any time in the next 2 weeks." 2 weeks, Caleb repeated, visibly getting nervous. "Already? The baby is ready to meet their parents," Dr. Thomas said with amusement, "and it seems the father is almost ready to meet the baby." Samantha laughed at Caleb's panicked expression. "Calm down, love," she said. "You're going to be a wonderful father." "What if I don't know what to do?" Caleb asked. "What if I drop the baby? What if he cries and I don't know why?" Dr. Thomas placed his hand on his brother's shoulder. "Caleb," he said calmly, "every first-time parent has these fears. It's normal, but what matters is the love you feel. The rest you learn by doing." "Thomas is right," Samantha agreed. "Nobody is born knowing how to be a parent. It's a daily learning process." That night, Caleb was too restless to sleep. He went out to the garden and stood contemplating the plants under the moonlight. Samantha found him there an hour later. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "I'm thinking," Caleb replied, "about everything that has changed in my life over the past year. And how do you feel about those changes?" Caleb considered the question carefully. "Awestruck," he said finally. "1 year ago, I was a lonely gardener who thought he would never be worthy of true love. Today, I have a wonderful fiancé, a baby on the way, and a thriving company." "You are worthy of all this and so much more," said Samantha firmly. Sometimes I'm still afraid I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream, Caleb admitted. Samantha took his hand and placed it on her belly. Feel that? She asked when the baby kicked. This is real. I am real. Our love is real. Our family is real. The baby's movement brought tears to Caleb's eyes. Our child, he murmured with reverence. Our child, Samantha repeated, who will grow up knowing they were loved even before being born. Samantha, Caleb said softly, there's something I want to ask you. What? When do you want to get married? Samantha smiled in the dark. I was waiting for you to ask that, she said. How about after the baby is born, when we're settled as a family? Perfect, Caleb agreed. I want our child to be present at our wedding. It will be the most beautiful ceremony in the world, Samantha said dreamily. They stayed in the garden for another hour, making plans for the wedding and for life as a family. When they finally went back inside, both felt at peace and ready for whatever the future might bring. 3 days later, at 5 a.m, Samantha woke Caleb with regular contractions. I think it's time, she said calmly. Caleb jumped out of bed immediately, his nerves taking over. What do I do? What do we need to bring? Are you okay? Does it hurt a lot? He fired off a series of questions while running around the room. Samantha laughed despite the pain. Breathe, Caleb, she said. The hospital bag is already packed. You just need to call Dr. Thomas and help me get to the car. The trip to the hospital was a mix of nervousness, excitement, and moments of pure comedy when Caleb forgot where he had parked the car because of his nerves. Caleb, Samantha said during a particularly strong contraction, you need to calm down. I'm going to need you to be strong for me during labor. Samantha's words had the desired effect. Caleb took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. You're right, he said, taking her hand. I promise to be the rock you need. When they arrived at the hospital, Dr. Thomas was already waiting with Dr. Susan. How's our mommy? Dr. Susan asked with a reassuring smile. Eager to meet my baby, Samantha replied. Labor lasted 8 hours, during which Caleb never left Samantha's side for a minute. He held her hand, wiped her sweat, whispered words of encouragement, and was exactly the support she needed. One last push, Samantha, Dr. Susan encouraged. The baby is almost here. With one final heroic effort, Samantha gave birth to a perfect and healthy baby girl. It's a girl, Dr. Susan announced joyfully. The baby's strong, healthy cry filled the room, and Caleb started crying with emotion. Hope Rose Santos Almeida, he said with a choked voice, looking at the little daughter who had just arrived in the world. When Dr. Susan placed Hope in Samantha's arms, it was a moment of pure magic. The girl had dark hair and big eyes that seemed to look directly into her mother's soul. Hi, Hope, Samantha whispered with tears of happiness. Mommy and Daddy love you so much. Caleb knelt beside the bed, gazing at his family with a mixture of awe and unconditional love. She's perfect, he said with reverence. She's ours, Samantha replied, carefully passing the baby into Caleb's arms. The moment Caleb held Hope for the first time, something magical happened. All his insecurities, all his fears, all his doubts about being a good father simply vanished. He knew with absolute certainty that he would give his life for that tiny creature in his arms. Rose, he whispered, his voice full of emotion, Daddy promises that you will always have love, protection, and all the opportunities you deserve in life. The baby seemed to recognize his voice and stopped crying, looking directly at him with her curious eyes. I think she already knows your voice, commented Dr. Susan with a smile. Did you talk to her throughout the pregnancy? Every night, replied Caleb without taking his eyes off Rose. I told her about the plants in the garden, about what life would be like when she was born, about how much we loved her. And apparently she was listening, said Dr. Thomas, who had entered the room to meet his niece. Look how calm she is in her daddy's arms. Martha and Richard arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, bringing flowers from the garden and hearts full of love for their first grandchild. "Where is my granddaughter?" asked Martha as soon as she entered the room. Caleb was sitting beside Samantha's bed, holding Rose, who slept peacefully in his arms. "Here she is," he said proudly, showing the baby to the grandparents. Richard approached with tears in his eyes. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice emotional. "She has Samantha's eyes when she was a baby." Martha sat carefully on the bed beside her daughter. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked. "Complete," replied Samantha simply. "For the first time in my life, I feel truly complete." "And you, Caleb?" asked Richard. "How's the new dad doing?" Caleb looked at Rose in his arms, then at Samantha, then at Richard. "Grateful," he said sincerely. "More grateful than words can express." Mrs. Gladys arrived soon after, carrying a small blanket she had knitted especially for the baby. "Where's the little princess?" she asked excitedly. "Here, Mrs. Gladys," said Caleb, standing up to show Rose. "What a beauty!" exclaimed the housekeeper. "She has her mother's delicacy and her father's strength." "What do you mean, her father's strength?" asked Caleb curiously. "In her hands," explained Mrs. Gladys wisely. "See how tightly she holds your finger. This girl will be as determined as her father and as loving as her mother." Mrs. Eleanor was one of the last to arrive, but she brought a special gift, a small rosebush in a pot that she had cultivated especially for Rose. "It's the same variety as the rose you gave Samantha on the day of the cancelled wedding," she explained to Caleb. "I thought it would be fitting." "Mrs. Eleanor," said Caleb, moved, "this is perfect. We'll plant it in the garden at the estate so Rose can grow up alongside her rosebush." "Exactly," agreed Mrs. Eleanor. "And when she's older, you can teach her about plants, just like your father taught you." The mention of Caleb's father brought tears to his eyes. "He would be very proud," said Dr. E. Thomas, noticing his brother's emotion. "He really would," agreed Caleb. "He always said that a man's greatest wealth was his family." As the day progressed and Rose grew accustomed to life outside the womb, it became increasingly clear that she had been born into a family full of love and devotion. "You know what impresses me the most?" said Samantha to Caleb when they were finally alone with Rose. "What?" "How you instantly became a father," she explained. "It's like you always knew exactly what to do." "It's instinct," said Caleb, carefully adjusting Rose's blanket. "When you love someone unconditionally, you just know how to take care of them." "And that's how I knew you would be a wonderful father," said Samantha, "because I saw how you take care of the plants, how you dedicate yourself to everything you love." Rose woke up and began to whimper softly. "She must be hungry," said Caleb, gently passing her to Samantha. While Samantha was breastfeeding Hope, Caleb watched with admiration the scene of pure maternal tenderness. "Samantha," he said softly, "thank you." "For what?" "For giving me the family I always dreamed of but never thought I deserved," he explained. "For transforming my life in ways I never imagined possible." "You transformed mine too," Samantha replied. "You taught me that true love has nothing to do with social conventions or expectations. It's about finding someone who loves you exactly as you are." Hope finished nursing, and Caleb picked her up to burp her. "Hope," he said softly to his daughter, "you're going to grow up in a family that loves you more than anything in the world, and when you're older, you'll understand that true love always wins, no matter what obstacles come along." Samantha watched Caleb interact with Hope, and her heart overflowed with happiness. "When do you want to set our wedding date?" she asked suddenly. Caleb smiled. "How about 6 months from now?" he suggested, "when Hope is a little bigger but still small enough to be our flower girl." "Perfect," Samantha agreed. "And this time the groom won't run away." "This groom will never run away," Caleb promised solemnly. "This family is everything I've ever wanted in life." End of story. Dear listeners, what an emotional story we've just shared. Samantha found in the gardener Caleb not only true love but a partner who loved her unconditionally, took her daughter as his own, and built an empire with her based on love and social responsibility. Now we want to know, what did you think of this story of overcoming and true love? Do you believe Samantha made the right choice in choosing Caleb instead of giving Julian a second chance? Leave your honest opinions in the comments about this love journey that blossomed in the toughest moments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one.